When people think about retirement, they usually imagine their income dropping, their savings slowly shrinking, and their financial world getting smaller. That's the story we hear all the time, right? Work for 40 years, stop working, and then carefully stretch what you saved so it lasts the rest of your life. But something interesting happens to a lot of people that nobody really talks about enough. Some people actually get richer after they retire. Not poorer, not barely getting by, richer. And when I first started noticing this pattern, I'll be honest, it surprised me. Because retirement is supposed to be the time when you stop earning money. But over the years, watching friends retire, talking to neighbors, and hearing stories from people who planned well, I started noticing something. The people who retire with a plan and the right mindset often end up building more wealth than they ever expected. So let's talk about why that happens. Because if you understand the reasons behind it, you might start looking at retirement very differently. The first reason people get richer after retirement is actually pretty simple, and it's something most people underestimate. Their spending drops dramatically. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but it's deeper than that. When you're working, life tends to be expensive in ways that you don't even notice. Think about the daily commute, the lunches out, the professional clothes, the gas, the parking, the dry cleaning, the quick convenience purchases because you're tired and busy. Those little expenses pile up quietly over decades. But when people retire, a lot of that just disappears overnight. You're not driving to work 5 days a week anymore. You're not buying new clothes just to keep up appearances at the office. You're not grabbing takeout because you're too exhausted to cook after a long day. Suddenly, you have time. And having time is surprisingly good for your wallet. I had a neighbor once who told me that after he retired, he sat down and looked at his monthly expenses 6 months later. He thought something was wrong with the numbers. He thought he forgot to include something, but nothing was missing. He was simply spending thousands less every month without even trying. And that's when he realized something important. The lifestyle he had during his working years was designed around convenience, not necessity. Another thing that happens is people start making better financial decisions once they retire. And this might sound strange, but when you're working full-time, money decisions often get rushed. You're busy, you're tired, and you don't always have the time to research things carefully. So maybe you overpay for insurance. Maybe you don't refinance a loan when you should. Maybe you keep paying for subscriptions you barely use. But when retirement comes along, something changes. People slow down. They start reviewing their finances with a clear head. They renegotiate bills. They cancel things they don't need. They become more intentional with their money. And those small adjustments can make a surprisingly big difference over time. Now, another big reason some retirees become wealthier is that their investments finally have time to do their thing without interruption. During your working years, you're constantly juggling things. Mortgage payments, kids' expenses, unexpected bills. Money goes in and out of your accounts all the time. But once retirement arrives and the big expenses are behind you, something powerful happens. Your investments keep growing, and they often grow faster than people expect. Because if someone retires in their mid-60s, there's a good chance they might live another 20 or even 30 years. That's a long time for compound growth to keep working. Many retirees find that even though they're withdrawing some money each year, their portfolio keeps climbing anyway, especially during strong market periods. I remember talking to a retired couple once who said that 10 years into retirement, their investment account was actually larger than the day they stopped working. And they weren't doing anything fancy. They simply stayed invested, lived reasonably, and let time do the rest. Now, another thing that surprises people, retirement often unlocks new ways to earn money, but without the pressure of needing a full-time job. A lot of retirees start doing small projects, consulting work, hobbies that turn into income, or part-time work that they actually enjoy. And the difference is, when you don't need the money, the experience feels completely different. I know a retired engineer who occasionally helps younger companies review designs for a few hours a week. He says it's fun, it keeps his mind active, and the extra income just gets invested. He laughs about it sometimes because he says he works maybe 10 hours a month now and still earns more than he expected. And that's another interesting shift that happens after retirement. When people no longer feel forced to earn money, they often end up creating income in ways that are more efficient and enjoyable. Another factor that makes retirees wealthier is something that doesn't get enough attention, and that's the disappearance of major life expenses. By the time many people retire, their mortgage is paid off,
Their kids are financially independent, their major purchases are already behind them. During your working life, you're constantly climbing financial mountains, buying a home, raising a family, paying for education, replacing cars, maintaining a household. But later in life, those mountains start to flatten out, and when they do, the money that used to go toward those responsibilities often stays in your pocket. One retiree told me something that stuck with me. He said, "The first time in my life that my money had nowhere it needed to go was after I retired." Think about that for a moment. For decades, his money had assignments, bills, responsibilities, goals, but suddenly those obligations were mostly gone.
And when money stops being constantly pulled away from you, it tends to grow faster. There's also a psychological shift that happens. When people retire, they often become more thoughtful about what actually makes them happy. During working years, it's easy to fall into the trap of spending money to cope with stress, vacations to escape work, shopping to reward yourself, expensive conveniences just to get through the week. But when that daily stress disappears, a lot of that spending disappears too. People start enjoying simpler things: walking, hobbies, visiting friends, spending time with family. And interestingly enough, many of the activities that bring the most happiness later in life are either free or very inexpensive. I've heard retirees say things like, "I have more time than money now, but somehow I'm spending less money than ever." And that combination can quietly build wealth over time. Now, there's another reason some retirees get richer, and it has to do with experience. By the time someone reaches retirement age, they've usually made a lot of financial mistakes already. They've learned lessons about debt, investing, spending, and planning, and those lessons stick. Younger people often make decisions based on urgency or emotion, but older adults tend to be calmer about money. They've seen market crashes before, they've seen recoveries, they've lived through economic cycles, and that experience helps them avoid panic decisions. I remember one retiree telling me that during a major market downturn, his children were calling him worried about their investments. Meanwhile, he was sitting calmly in his chair reading the newspaper. He had already seen several market crashes in his lifetime, and he knew something younger investors were still learning. Markets fall, but they also recover. That kind of patience can protect wealth in powerful ways. And then there's another quiet reason retirees sometimes grow wealth faster than expected. They finally have the time to pay attention to opportunities. During working years, many people are simply too busy to notice certain financial opportunities. Maybe it's investing, maybe it's real estate, maybe it's learning a new skill. But retirement gives people time to explore things they never had time for before. And sometimes those explorations turn into surprisingly profitable ventures. I've seen retirees start small online businesses, rent out property, teach classes, write books, or turn hobbies into small income streams, not because they needed the money, but because they enjoyed the process. And sometimes those little projects grow into something bigger than they ever expected. So when people say retirement automatically means becoming poorer, that's not always true. For many people, retirement is when their financial life actually becomes simpler, calmer, and in some cases, more prosperous. But there is one more important factor that separates retirees who grow wealth from those who struggle, and it has nothing to do with investment strategies or market timing. It has to do with mindset. Because the people who tend to do well financially after retirement usually approach life differently. They're curious, they keep learning, they stay active, they remain engaged with the world around them. And those qualities often lead to smarter decisions and unexpected opportunities. Now, before we go further, I want to talk about a few more reasons this happens, because some of them are surprisingly powerful and they don't get talked about enough. But before I get into those, if you've ever wondered whether retirement might actually open new financial doors instead of closing them, then the next part of this conversation is really important. So let's keep going. Now, another reason some people get richer after retirement is something that almost nobody talks about, and that is the power of delayed benefits. Many retirees make a strategic decision to wait before claiming certain benefits, and that patience can make a huge difference over time. For example, some people choose to delay taking their retirement benefits for a few years. On the surface, that might sound like a sacrifice. You're turning down money today. But the reward for waiting is often a much larger monthly income later. And that larger income can last for decades. I've met people who delayed their benefits until they were 70 years old, and they told me something interesting. Once those bigger payments started coming in, they realized they were receiving more money every month than they ever expected during retirement. In some cases, their guaranteed income alone covered most of their expenses. And when your basic expenses are covered by steady income, something powerful happens. Your investments no longer have to carry the entire load. They can continue growing quietly in the background. Another thing that often helps retirees build more wealth is the simple fact that they stop chasing risky financial decisions. During working years, many people feel pressure to grow their wealth quickly. They may jump into speculative investments, chase hot trends, or try to time the market. But later in life, that urgency tends to fade. Retirees often become more focused on preservation and steady growth. They become more patient. They look for stability rather than excitement. And ironically, that calmer approach often leads to better long-term results. There's a saying that experienced investors like to repeat. They say the first rule of building wealth is making money. But the second rule is much more important. Don't lose the money you've already made. Many retirees understand this deeply. They've already climbed the mountain. Now their goal is simply to protect the view. Another surprising factor that helps retirees financially is the social shift that happens when people leave the workforce. When you're working, there can be a lot of subtle pressure to keep up with others. Maybe coworkers are upgrading cars, buying bigger homes, going on expensive trips, or spending money in ways that feel normal within that environment. But once people retire, that social pressure often fades. Your circle changes. Many of your friends are in similar stages of life, and suddenly the competition disappears. Instead of comparing job titles, salaries, and promotions, people start comparing things like gardens, travel stories, grandchildren, or hobbies. And those comparisons tend to be far less expensive. One retiree once joked with me that when he was working, conversations with coworkers often revolved around what they had bought. But after retirement, conversations revolved around what they had planted. And believe it or not, that shift alone can reduce spending dramatically. Now here's another thing that sometimes surprises people. Many retirees end up becoming better savers than they ever were before, not because they're trying harder, but because their lives become more predictable. During your working years, life throws a lot of curveballs. Job changes, relocations, raising kids, unexpected repairs, health issues, and countless other surprises. Those things can make saving difficult. But once retirement settles in, the pace of life often slows down. Expenses become more stable, and that stability makes financial planning much easier. Some retirees even set up simple systems where a portion of their income automatically flows into savings or investment accounts each month. They treat saving like a regular bill, and over time, that consistency quietly builds wealth. There's also something else that happens after retirement that can have a powerful financial effect. People start valuing quality over quantity. Earlier in life, it's easy to accumulate things. More clothes, more gadgets, more furniture, more everything. But as people age, they often realize that having fewer, better things actually makes life simpler. So instead of constantly buying new items, they focus on maintaining what they already have. They repair things instead of replacing them. They buy durable products that last longer. That mindset shift alone can significantly reduce long-term spending. And then there's another factor that doesn't get enough attention. Retirees often become very good at using their time creatively. When you're working full-time, it's easy to solve problems by spending money. Something breaks, you hire someone immediately. You need something done, you pay for the fastest solution. But when you have more time, you can approach things differently. Some retirees learn basic home repairs. Others grow their own vegetables. Some cook more meals at home. Others learn skills they never had time to explore before. These changes may seem small individually, but together they can save thousands of dollars each year.
I once spoke with a retired teacher who said she started gardening simply because she enjoyed being outdoors. A few years later, she realized she was growing a large portion of the vegetables she used throughout the year. She laughed and said the hobby paid for itself many times over. And then there's something even more interesting that happens to many retirees. They start becoming mentors. Younger people often seek out older adults for advice about careers, investing, business, and life decisions. Sometimes those conversations stay informal, but other times they turn into consulting opportunities, partnerships, or paid speaking engagements. Not because retirees are chasing income, but because their experience has real value. Think about it. Someone who has spent 40 or 50 years building knowledge in a field often has insights that younger professionals are eager to learn from. And when that knowledge is shared in the right way, it can create new income streams. Now, I want to be clear about something. Not everyone becomes richer after retirement. That's not the reality for everyone. But the people who do tend to share a few common habits. They avoid unnecessary debt. They keep their lifestyle reasonable. They keep curious and open to learning, and they remain patient with their investments. Most importantly, they understand something that many younger people struggle with. Wealth is not only about how much money you earn, it's about how well you manage the money you already have. Retirement can actually make that easier. Fewer distractions, fewer obligations, more time to think clearly about what really matters. And when those conditions come together, the results can be surprisingly powerful. So if you're approaching retirement or even thinking about it years from now, it might be helpful to shift the way you look at it. Instead of seeing retirement as the moment when your financial life stops growing, it might actually be the moment when your financial life becomes more efficient. You might spend less, you might make smarter decisions, you might discover new opportunities, and you might finally give your investments the time they need to flourish. And that's why some people look back 10 or 15 years after retiring and realize something they never expected. They didn't just maintain their wealth, they grew it, and often in ways that felt calmer, simpler, and more fulfilling than the years when they were working nonstop. Now, if you enjoyed spending these few minutes with me thinking about retirement in a slightly different way, I appreciate you being here. And if this conversation got you thinking about your own financial future, that's even better. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.